So, by and large, Jujutsu Kaisen doesn't have the greatest selection of figures in the market, at least not right now. A lot are really good, but a pretty sizable amount are pricey for how tame and kinda underwhelming they are. JJK is an incredibly kinetic series with loud characters and bombastic poses and rapid movement. It's just a shame that whenever new figures drop, most of them are just kinda standing there. First of all, the series is only 6 years old, and has only been the biggest thing in the entire goddamn world for the past 2 or so years. So the merch will only keep getting bigger and better as the years go on. Plus, the more popular something gets, the more cheap price figures there will be. But in the meantime, I thought I'd just take matters into my own hands and throw together some JJK figures of my own design. Now, I don't have a bunch of clay or the time and energy to sculpt these digitally, but what I do have is Photoshop and a drawing tablet. And even though I won't be able to turn these around and show you the incredible dimensionality a real figure can have, I do think I have some cool ideas that can still translate well into some 2D prototypes. When you hold and admire something like this, you want it to be a technical marvel. The best figures will have you saying, wow, this thing is strong. How is this part even attached? The detail is so small, how'd they even paint this thing? And of course the best compliment one of these can receive. Damn, that pose goes hard as hell. My biggest gripe with most anime figures is right there in the name, anime. These companies are either not allowed or are entirely allergic to adapting manga panels into this 3D form of art. If I had to guess why, it could be a few things. Perhaps these companies simply don't have permission. Maybe they can only adapt from the anime because they have way more references for the characters, like turnaround sheets and color palettes. Maybe they just don't want to spoil story events on the store shelves, or are afraid of them not selling as well as the anime-specific merchandise. But me? I'm not held to any of that. Because of my patrons like Gambit, Hoops McCann, Joe Wheelcar, and Noisy Peta, I was able to afford the drawing tablet this video was made on, so big ups to them. And if you want to see more content like this, Patreon would be the best way to express that. But without further ado, let's get into it. I'm limiting myself to 2 figure drawings in this video, mostly because of time. Maybe it's just because I'm new to the tablet game, but the bigger illustrations in this video took me 6 to 10 hours each to make. I will, however, let myself sketch to my heart's content if I need to get my point across, because I'm sure I'll wind up having more than 2 ideas. But if that pesky time being wasn't constantly hounding me, I'd be doing this all day. Plenty of manga panels in this series are fluid and berserk enough to warrant a $200 figure easily. Imagine, spoilers by the way, Yuji's manji kick for example, or practically anything from Hikari vs Kashimo. Maki impaling Sukuna, Wing King Choso, Yuki with Garuda flying around her, Higuruma's attempted execution, Yuji walking through Cleave, Kenjaku's final form, Hikari drop-kicking Uraume in the face, Gojo punching Uraume, Gojo punching Agito, Gojo sending Sukuna to the Shadow Realm, Takaba and Kenjaku picking each other's noses, Takaba getting eaten by bugs, or any of Yuji's 8 black flashes that he just hit on Sukuna in the manga. If it wasn't clear, I really value dynamic poses, but one of the most slept on aspects of these is interesting bases. When I was a kid, my dad had a ton of these awesome Spider-Man figures and they all had these insane bases. I've always found that little extra plot is so valuable to the overall feel of a piece of art like this. It's what can ultimately turn this from a cute little action figure on your desk to a grand piece of art. My first few ideas, however, the sketches, the real prototypes, are mostly the former, action figures. Like prototype number 1. My first idea is a simple Mahito figure, so simple in fact that this one could easily be opposable. That's my excuse for not drawing it super dynamically. But regardless, I think it'd be fun to give Mahito an outstretched hand for idle transfiguration, maybe even with some clear resin flames of cursed energy bellowing out from his hand. But this isn't the fun part. You see, Mahito's got these stitches all over him, which is a perfect way to disguise segments in the plastic. What that means is you could just pop his hand right off and replace it with a different body horror attachment and it would be seamless. Like his giant club that he bludgeons Yuji with, or his whip-like arms made of razors, this could go so much farther too. This figure could come with a ton of extras, like Mahito's rabbit legs, or even separate heads like when he's casting his domain. I'm planning on going all out for these figures in terms of concept, so if they were real, none of them would be super cheap. If I had to estimate a price range for this figure, I'd say it's gotta be $70 to $100 at least. Posable figures usually end up being cheaper, but this would be way more high quality than your average prize toy. Plus in a perfect world it would come with 10 different accessories, so hopefully it would make up for that rather steep price. And that's just what I think it would cost, not how much I would want it to cost, obviously. Our second prototype wouldn't be quite as expensive, it's more of a small little display piece. It's mimicking this panel of Yuji getting slashed by Sukuna. Also, before you try to expose me for tracing in the comments, it's a figure, so yeah, I'm trying to stay as close to on model as I possibly can. Plus, it's just a silly little sketch, I'm not passing anybody else's work off as my own or anything. This might be a little bit hard for some people to hear, but tracing is good for you as an artist, especially early on, as long as you show your references and don't just steal the credit for them. And obviously, it's more morally acceptable to trace stills from a show, like where the artists are being paid and not just like some Twitter artist that you like or something. But either way, ask literally any 10-year-old who's traced Goku on his living room floor 200 times, it's an extremely effective way of learning the flow of the human form. I can't even count how many characters and poses I traced as a kid, just to really drill proportions into my head without having to do all the boring stuff like figure drawing and fundamentals. Why draw some naked old dude in school when I can get a feel for musculature, clothing folds, facial expressions, proportions, and everything else through childish traced fan art that nobody's really ever seen. Until now, because I'm making a point. Enough defense though, let's go on offense. So my idea with this Yuji figure is that it's made totally normally, like a regular figure. Then you take this hunk of plastic and actually put it on a saw and cut it in half. Then you replace the space left by that cut with a clear piece of plastic or resin or whatever else have you. Then you could see through the cleave and light would refract through it. I just think it's a really cool way to show Sukuna's slash. And yes, I know he didn't literally divide Yuji in two, it's more of a visual thing, but if accuracy is what you're after, there's no shortage of characters who Sukuna actually did sever into pieces. For the price on this one, I don't know, 25 bucks? If the process of cutting the plastic and adding the resin to the figure has to be hand done, then it could be cranked up to like 40 or 50. My third prototype has no sort of interesting method of creation or wacky play features, it's just kind of a brick of plastic. But I really want a figure of Takaba playing dead like this. If for nothing else, just to use it as a paperweight. Plus it'd be cheap, like $17 to $28 exactly, roughly. My fourth and final prototype before we get into my two real proposals might be my favorite, but that might just be because I'm very desperate for Hikari merchandise. I really hope he's a fan favorite when he finally shows up in the anime, so we can get the badass figures of him that he so rightfully deserves. Of all his coolest moments, the one I chose to represent here was the last minute clutch jackpot which ultimately saved his life. The coolest thing about this figure being that it's a lamp. I didn't draw his back, so just close your eyes and imagine, but there's a small hole on his back with a tiny LED inside. Then you can take this clear plastic 2D image of his jackpot cards and slot them into that hole, illuminating them and the surrounding area. This could be done in two different ways. Like I said, you could make it a night lamp with like a remote controlled LED, or you could scrap the whole light element of the figure entirely and just make these out of colored transparent plastic. That would probably end up making it cheaper, but also way less fun. If you did go that route though, instead of being stuck with just one type of cards, you could swap them out for others. I just like the lamp approach because it's more vibrant and fun and interactive. I think this figure could be made for surprisingly cheap, 20 to 40 bucks. But I think they should go all out, give it a really nice high quality base, some crazy detail in his regeneration, and they could probably get away with doubling that price easily. But now we're on to the big leagues. I probably should have made some sort of courtroom metaphor instead of baseball, because the first thing I drew was a Higgy Figgy. What you're watching now is my first ever attempt at a speed paint, and I think it's kind of fun, even with how much storage on my computer these hour-long recordings take up. Something you may have noticed is that I decided to fill Judge Man's scales with money, mostly because that's what I saw in this panel right here, which I was using for reference. It was only until about halfway through my coloring, which I chose not to record because I wanted to use my second monitor to watch One Piece, that I was like, what color do I draw this money? What color is Japanese money? I was tired and just decided to go with green, which is when my lovely friend Cake, who upon seeing the almost finished picture said, "Does Judge Man really have money in his little thingies?" And I was like, yeah, of course, right? Wait, oh no. So then I painstakingly removed all of that money that I just Mandela affected myself into believing was there the whole time. Now it just kind of felt strange being so dynamic yet empty. It kind of made it come off as a little rigid. I wanted this figure to be grand and imposing, standing at like 8 to 12 inches tall and heavy. But now that a lot of the small detail was gone, it made it feel a lot smaller. A solution that oddly worked to remedy this a little bit was instead of these scales being held by plastic strings mimicking movement, you could just make them actual strings. Which idea do you like more? I really like the idea of these being actual flexible string material. It makes me want to put a bunch of little trinkets in these scales or use them as some sort of big gaudy jewelry dish. But you wouldn't have any jewelry to put in it because something this big would likely run your pockets, at least in the hundreds, 2 to 5 at minimum. But if you're a company planning on making these, you're probably thinking, how do I extort triple the price off these babies? And it's simple. Take inspiration from Higuruma's Domain expansion and make 2 more giant figures, Yuji and Heian Sukuna, both at the stand. If you had all 3, you could put them together just like this. It'd be awesome. But I didn't even know the meaning of the word awesome until I did the second figure drawing. Now, before I reveal my masterpiece, I will say I do have more ideas. If you want to see them or have an idea you want me to bring to life, leave it in the comments, or better yet, head to jallomoth.com. So if there's one character in this entire series that is amazingly cool relative to how little screen time they have, it's Yuki. But there's another, one even more underrated. Oh, Yorozu. If Yorozu's bug suit doesn't get a full-scale figure like this, we will riot. Not gonna lie, inking this thing with all the 10 Shadows bunnies was a nightmare. So let's just skip ahead and I'll show you the coloring. Right from the start, I knew I wanted to do this. Originally, I was gonna do 3 big figures at the end here, but while I was doing this one, I wanted to put so much attention into it that I kinda decided to forego the last illustration altogether, and put everything I could into what's likely my favorite character Jujutsu Kaisen has to offer. I'm sure you've heard my love for this character enough the past year or so. I try my absolute hardest to show this image as much as I possibly can within any given edit, but unlike most characters, Yorozu's bug suit is one of the few who have no official coloring. She was never on a cover or a backing or a colored panel or anything, but I decided to go with this sort of pinkish off-white in the end. The reason for the pink tone is because Yorozu is fueled pretty entirely by love and love alone. The reason I chose white overall is because that seems to be the most normal color of most curses. Jogo, Hanami, Rika, Noya, the Finger Bearers, Kujisake Onna, Maharaga, etc. There are of course Flyheads, Dagon, the Worm, the Rainbow Dragon. They aren't limited to white, so she could totally be a green-ass bug. I just kinda went with what spoke to me and what felt right. That isn't this. I paused the speed paint and locked in for a few hours, really honing everything together, every little detail, and I ended up with this. I couldn't be happier with how this turned out overall, until I realized I forgot to draw her foot, and that looks kinda stupid, but hopefully you didn't notice that. Wait. This video probably would have been a lot more compelling if I painstakingly did all this in 3D so I could have these epic shots showing them spin, but learning Blender in its entirety isn't really a weekly upload kind of thing. Speaking of weekly upload, this is late, so I need to hurry up. If you like this video and want to see more, interact with it. Comment, like, subscribe, obviously. And how would you guys feel about merch now that I'm going to be making a lot more art-based content, like shirts and prints and stuff? But I'm only going to consider it a possibility if enough of you guys speak up, so let me know. Have a good night. See you next week. Thanks for watching, and stay curious.